Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to el podcast del Salón de Idiomas. Hey, Rox, how are you doing?
Fine, pretty excited with this new episode.
Yeah? How has everything been going? Are you been handling stressful situations?
Well, I've tried and I've came across some interesting strategies
Yeah?
which I believe we can actually make use of.
Now, this rings a bell to me a little bit,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
it does. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially in exams or official exams or whenever we have to show that we know when we're under pressure.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we have an episode previous to this one. I believe that it's one of probably one of the first podcasts. It doesn't have a video actually.
Right.
Where we are actually talking about handling pressure, well, only under exam conditions. However, today I believe that we can scratch a little bit more than the surface and talk a bit more like situations, especially in speaking, that can be stressful and how we can handle them.
Yeah, definitely. Here in Salón de Idiomas, we are like both of us are also interlocutors and examiners.
Mm-hmm.
So we see that whenever we do exams, well, unfortunately, there are so many of them. I think just 1 out of 10 might be really a cool cucumber when doing the exam, and that's really it's striking, right? It's like, oh, I wish there were more people like that. But unfortunately, I believe 9 out of 10 are definitely really nervous.
Yeah. And to my mind, this also happens due to the fact that you are not normally used to handling that normal stress that you would have by just speaking another language before the test. So, of course, it makes sense that when you're going to take the test, you're even more stressed and everything is more difficult to handle and you don't even know what to answer. And perhaps your performance is not as you probably already have, like your level.
Yeah, definitely. So I believe that's the reason why we should get used to being under pressure.
Yeah. So now, what kind of situation could you be under pressure, especially when speaking?
You mean out of the day of the exam, like in a different or during the exam?
Well, maybe just like taking the test, or maybe in another situation. Any of them.
Um, well, I do believe it actually depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, like for me, there's no stress whatsoever in talking to people, even doing an oral exam.
Uh-huh.
However, I think I've always kind of had stage fright. So for me, that's extremely painful.
What are we doing here? Because like I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah.
That I actually feel. I have to be honest. Like every time I'm going to deliver a lesson, I still feel a little nervous at the beginning. Like introducing myself. Like even though that I have been teaching these people for like months, I'm like oof oof oof, and then of course everything goes fine and everything is like as I prepared. Nevertheless, there's always some little pressure that I have in the beginning, and I also feel like I suffer from stage fright. And yeah, I don't know what we're doing recording a podcast.
Providing examples.
Here we are. Yeah, look, you see.
No, but actually it works. I have to admit, when I was a kid, I would be extremely shy. I honestly wouldn't look at people's eyes, especially if they were grown-ups or more, yeah, adults, and I was a kid. I couldn't bear that because I was so utterly shy. And well, gradually I kind of lost that, thankfully, but I do remember that it was quite painful as well to talk in class. Like when I was in high school, I had colleagues, like giving presentations and everything. They were like pretty cool with it. In the end, all of us knew each other, but I still had that stage fright. And then when I went to university and we had to expose and expound things like in front of large crowds, oh, that was painful. I remember actually trembling, and my professor was like, "Oh my God, poor girl." But I believe that long exposure to situation of that sort actually helped me overcome it.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, the more you do it, the easier it gets. It gets easier. The only
Yeah.
difficult thing is that you have to do it often. That's it. Even if it's possible, try to do it every day.
So I have a question. So when you prepare students for official exams, do you try to resemble that stressful situation, or are you much more of a calmer interlocutor with them?
Well, this is something that I wanted to address later. However, I guess that is the best moment for this. As a matter of fact, every time I'm delivering lessons, especially for like speaking tests, um, my experience is that it's even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that when I'm teaching the lessons, they are more harsh than if they were taking the test. And basically, due to the fact that in my lessons I tend to speak really fast,
Oh, okay. You really, you
and
really
they're
make.
like, come on, like, oh my god. Sometimes they are actually a little scared, since they're like, I cannot understand you. If I cannot understand you, that you are my teacher, how am I going to understand the interlocutors? And I have to like rewind a little and be like, oh, actually, don't worry. I mean, I speak really fast,
Mm,
so it's okay. The interlocutor probably is going to have a more paced tone, and probably they are going to gesticulate their mouth
yeah.
even more. That's actually my case when I have to be an interlocutor. I actually have to like bite my tongue every once in a while, so I'm making sure that I'm not that I'm not going too fast.
Yeah. Well, that's a fact. I mean, we do tailor. I mean, we adapt ourselves to the candidate the day of the exam, and especially if they're not students of ours, I make sure that I make that path smoother for them because they might be frightened. It's like I have no idea who am I encountering here. But anyhow, I think we haven't still got bogged down into details with the strategies on how to handle. So what was the first point? What would be the first point to tackle?
Well, just basically the pressure that you feel whenever you have to just start opening your mouth and delivering words. Perhaps, especially in the scenarios that we have mentioned, like presenting an official exam, or maybe delivering a lecture in the classroom or something along those lines. Of course, the easier step would be to just prevent it or think about ahead what is going to happen. You could also get used to what the conditions are going to be like. For instance, in an official exam, you know that if you're taking a test, you know that it has this many parts, and you know that each part lasts a certain amount of time. And of course, you end up feeling more comfortable
Yeah.
since it's not going to take you by surprise whenever you are facing this situation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, getting prepared to like the topics and the general topics of the exam really helps. And in the end, I mean, there's a list of topics which
Yeah.
are usually the same and quite repetitive. So that can help as well. So you're not that, like taken aback by a question, especially because you might have somehow gotten used to that vocabulary in class or by reading something, exposing yourself to that specific topic. Like, for instance, in language search, there are some topics regarding traveling to the outer space, you know? So in those cases, which is a bit more specific, if you just get used to reading some articles or something of a sort, it might not be that, oh my God, what are they asking me?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's absolutely correct. Traveling, for instance, is a really common topic, and of
Yeah.
course, you can also think about the environment and sports and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, you have to admit that you might not be well aware of a question like, "Would you like to live in Mars?"
Yeah, that might
What do
be a
you do
bit.
in that case?
Well, in that specific case, there are some ways of gaining time, which are pretty useful. I believe we can even talk about them a bit later, or I can go into more details. My idea, I mean, there's a specific method which really comes in handy, is called P.R.E.P. So, firstly, you make a point. That's the first P of the acronym. So P.R.E.P. You make a point, and your point just it can just be saying whether you would live on Mars or not. As easy as that. Of course, contextualizing a bit. Like, okay, so I guess that from my point of view, I would not live on Mars, and if I were to go on Mars and I had no other choice, I will try my best to get along. Okay. Now, the next one, I don't remember which was the next one. So, okay, so P.R.E.P. R was standing for reasoning. Yeah, so you were giving a reason on why you would act in such a way, right? Like the first thing you can say, you can stick to the idea that I will not go there because I'm used to living in on our planet, and I don't want to be there with nothing else but sand.
Of course.
And if I were, however, to go there, I try my best to get by and to leave, because I believe the conditions are really harmful and harsh. Okay, so basically, just providing a bit more information to the point you have been giving. The next one is going to be giving examples. Okay, so P.R.E.P. P.R.E.P. The E stands for providing examples. So you can provide an example on how probably you could live on Mars. Okay, I guess that the easiest way would say just to have enough oxygen, or to have like a space provided so you can live on with that, because otherwise it's virtually impossible to live on Mars. And again, you will have to make a different point. You will have to make again a point. That's the P from prep. Okay, and that point actually strengthens the whole idea you have been providing from the beginning. Okay, so in that second point that you make, it actually goes along the same first lines. So bearing that in mind, for example, so in conclusion, bearing that in mind, hard life on Mars would be actually difficult. It still gives me reason on why not to live on Mars, as it will be utterly difficult to survive. And long story short, okay? So you haven't actually said much, but you actually, what you did do was to use a strategy, like some steps that you followed, okay? So prep, point, reason, examples, and point again to finish that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I do believe that you could also get away with more things. For instance, if you are even less acknowledged of the topic, for instance, Mars, perhaps, yeah, you know the planet and that it has sand and that's pretty much it. Nevertheless, perhaps you don't know about the environmental conditions, that it's either too cold or too hot, depending on the cycle of the day. But in the end, but by the part that you were mentioning about reasoning, perhaps you could also provide more details about yourself. And to my mind, that's super easy. Like
Definitely.
talking about yourself is always a little bit easier, right? You could explain, yeah, you mentioned, okay, I like living on Earth. Perhaps I also love trees. I am really into nature. I love going to the mountains and seeing the birds. And of course, this planet doesn't have any of that, so that would make me depressed or something like that. You could actually
Definitely.
talk about
And
that.
you made a really good point. By taking that to your field or to your personal experience, you start being a bit less stressed, because in the end, you talk about your likes, dislikes, your feelings, and you are in a comfortable space. And that's a really good one. And of course, you don't necessarily have to go along the same lines, right? This is a bit similar to sometimes our students say, okay, but this is a bit apart, but it actually shows the same point. For instance, a thing that we try to do is to make our students come up with many synonyms, so they don't use the same word all over again, like the keyword of whatever topic they might be talking about. And they tell me, okay, but if I cannot focus on a second synonym, why do I say? Why do I use? And I tell them, well, you don't have to come up with a second or a third synonym if you don't know a second or a third synonym. What you can do is to negate an antonym. Okay, so that goes the same line. So you're asked about what would you do and would you like to live on Mars, right? Now, you may have not many knowledge, not much knowledge about Mars, like I don't, for instance. You could, you can negate not going to Mars, and you take it to your field, right? Like you take it to your comfortable zone, which is Earth.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely useful, actually. Perhaps you could also talk it about even simpler topics. For instance, you could say, why do people love traveling? Perhaps you don't have a synonym for love or even traveling. Well, maybe you could say something like, well, I guess that individuals don't like to stick around in one place is due to the fact that,
Yeah.
or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or you can just generalize. You know, you can general if you don't have a synonym to traveling, like traveling to Mars, and you can use it from a different perspective. You know, individuals don't like whatever staying in the same place. You know, negate that synonym. You can just generalize, like, okay, so this aspect referring to traveling to Mars, this aspect, you just refer to it, you just generalize it. This aspect is not very attractive to many of us.
Absolutely. There you are. Yeah. I think that that sounds a little bit more simple than what I was just mentioning, like sticking around perhaps.
No, but I mean that was a really good example. So basically, if we were to summarize a bit what we've done, there are some strategies. You know, like first you make a point, then you give a reason why you make that point. Secondly, thirdly, you provide an example, which is very useful. And then again, you make a different point. Now, if not a different point, you make again the point to finish and close your reasoning and your answer. Now, if you take it to a personal field, to your preferences, to your feelings, it makes it more comfortable. And then again, if you find ways of actually referring to the situation or not referring to it by using different synonyms or negating antonyms, it's also going to be helpful.
Yeah. Now, another thing that I do want to address is perhaps when you are not really acquainted to fluently speaking, which is absolutely normal, especially if you are like an intermediate level, maybe like a B1 or B2. Just think about like useful phrases to, like, you could buy time, right?
Yeah.
Something like, oh, that's an interesting question, something like that. Perhaps that gives you a little extra seconds so you can actually think what you're going to say. Of course, you're thinking in another language that can be tough. That happens even in advanced levels. Um, on the other hand, you could actually point out that whatever you are told is something that you are not really aware of. Perhaps you can say, never have I thought about that, or something like that, right?
Or again, if I were to go back to the same idea of making a generic point by saying, okay, so I believe this topic is quite interesting, and I guess many of us will have some difficulties to try to answer it. So you somehow gain some time, but just by just giving your opinion on the topic, right? Not actually going into details about the topic.
Absolutely.
But saying that, well, okay, quite a topic, honestly. And it's a way of reacting. And if you do that, I guess the examiner is going to be like pretty sympathetic, which is like, okay, yeah, I guess it's not such a piece of cake, right?
Yeah. By the way, of course, we are still like leaning towards a little bit the part of the official exams. Nevertheless, keep in mind that again, it's absolutely natural, even in these situations, that you point out whatever you are feeling at the moment, right? It's absolutely normal. You're a human.
Definitely, even focusing on the fact that you might not know about the topic, and that's not going to be a negative, because in the end, when it comes to official exams, I believe what actually stands out is the shape a bit more than the content. So you can actually say that you don't have much knowledge about it. So you could say that you don't have much knowledge about it, you try to do your best, and somehow you do provide some basic ideas. And sometimes the simpler the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. By the way, another thing that I do believe that you can see as a symptom of being stressed is speaking very fast, actually.
Or just rambling.
Yeah, rambling, absolutely.
No, rambling and even trembling. I remember that in some case, it must have been a couple of months ago, during the oral exam for a C1 level. One of the candidates, she was so nervous. And whenever she was talking, her upper lip was constantly moving.
Oh.
And I felt like really bad for her. I tried to do it, the way I asked, and I would smile to her and nod like, okay, you're doing fine. Okay, I cannot say that, but my body language was really receptive to making her feel comfortable. But that's a really strong sign of someone being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That happens. Now, another thing that I do believe that is quite detrimental for your performance is accelerating too much. I mentioned this a moment ago that I tend to speak very fast in my lessons, and that's why they tend to see it as more challenging, especially in the real test. However, that's definitely a symptom of being very nervous or stressed. In my case, that's what happens to me. Usually, when I normally speak fast, since I kind of like feel stage fright. um, and actually, that happens to my students. I have seen that they try to speak as fast as I do, and of course, perhaps they are not as used to that, as speaking that fast, and they make more mistakes. So I always have to tell them, "Hey, you don't have to speak as fast as I am. Don't worry."
So did you manage to make them go slower?
Yeah. Of course, sometimes every time they are like delivering an answer, I'm always like, "You're going fast. Stop, stop. This is not a race." I know that I tend to make it look like that, but it's not a race.
Yeah, definitely. I believe chunking the sentences in pieces of information or like segments makes it easier, even for intonation, right? So perhaps that's a way, like firstly make them visualize the sentence they're actually uttering as if it were written, and imagine like where they would divide, where they would stop within the sentence, so that way they can go a bit slower.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's something that it's worth mentioning as well, that making absolute pauses is not negative at all. Sometimes when we are talking, we think that if we stop talking for some reason, due to the fact that we want to emphasize, or perhaps we lost our chain of thought for just a second, that is going to be terrible. No, that's not the case. It's absolutely natural that at some moment you're going to pause, so you are again emphasizing what you're saying, or perhaps you want to give yourself a second. Again, it's much better to deliver a slow paced answer that is well structured and well pronounced rather than a really fast and mumbly and rambly sentence.
Definitely. And I believe that could be trained as well even before class. Like making sure that like leaving behind that fright of thinking that you're missing out on things if you're not constantly creating words and uttering words and saying something of a sort. And actually, that I believe that might be even detrimental for you if you keep speaking for the sake of speaking, because otherwise you believe you are missing on information, because you're more likely to make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, another way that you can perhaps give yourself these pauses is by using useful sentences, saying like, let me see how I explain this. And then you give yourself a second, right? Perhaps you could also use signposting, right? Like, firstly,
Yeah,
secondly,
that really helps.
yeah.
And
And of course, the stressing of words is also allowing you or allowing the listener to understand when you're actually going to pause, right?
definitely.
So those are things that you should also perhaps employ to make it easier and more natural, since perhaps you're going to feel awkward when you are pausing. This is going to be a more natural way to do so.
Definitely. And going back to, okay, chunking the information, using signposting, you can actually, again, take it to your personal field by saying something of a sort. Well, this reminds me the time that, or this reminds me of a situation that happened, so with that, a bit similar to the main topic you have to deliver, you take it to an example of something that you have lived and or experienced, and that way again you feel more comfortable, you're in your comfortable zone, and you don't stray away too far from the main idea.
Correct. Exactly.
I was also thinking of something more abstract, like at the beginning, if you just find it hard to put your mind at ease and not get too stressed, is like positive visualization.
Yeah.
I would imagine, what I will do is like try to imagine your examiner smiling at you and nodding. So if you picture that in your brain, in your mind, and imagine that whenever you are doing the exam, the examiner is going to make it easy for you. He or she's like a friend. You might digest that easier.
Yeah, this is the good old example of like, I cannot tell you, for instance, you're doing the opposite of how are you not stressed? Well, don't think about being stressed. It's like if I tell you right now, don't think about an elephant skating in a pink lake. I was like it's the first thing that you're gonna do. So of course, perhaps you can don't say these kind of things like, oh, I'm not gonna get nervous. No, you're already thinking about getting nervous. So try to visualize the thing that you wanna do. Like, oh, I'm gonna speak quite correctly. My examiner is going to look at me and they're gonna nod to make me understand that I'm doing a good job. And probably I'm not gonna get no. Then there you are. You see?
Yeah, I know. However, I wouldn't stake too much on the idea that I'm gonna do it correctly. I'm gonna do it correctly. I'm gonna do it correctly, because what happens is, and I had that some cases. Once they finish the exam, it's like, oh my God, I didn't do it the way I expected it to be done. So I wouldn't create too higher expectations.
Yeah, that's also worth mentioning.
When you're in the exam, there are like many things that can happen. For some reason, that doesn't actually happen. At least in my experience, it has never happened. But for some reason, you might not hit it off with the examiner, or for some reason, you got congestion in the traffic and you were a bit late and you were just on the time and the exam started right away, which is not recommendable. Always be on time. So that things can add up to your stress. What happened is that all the previous schemes that you have in your mind can actually break down if they don't go along the strategies that you had beforehand. I believe the room for an uncertainty is really important. It's like whatever it might be, just might be, but I do visualize my examiner smiling at me. And if he doesn't smile, I will smile at him.
There you are. Yeah. There you are. Absolutely. I guess that it also boils down to fears, like fear of being judged, right?
Yeah.
Like all this stress of like just answer. You don't have to like think that much about what the other person is going to think about your answer. Just deliver your answer the way that you think about it without like any restraints, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I believe we could add even more this touch of psychological strategies in our classes, aimed at breaking some barriers when it comes to, handling stressful situations. To some extent, not necessarily speaking, which is the most obvious one and we're actually focusing on, but even working under pressure.
Yeah.
Or writing something. Writing tends to be pretty stressful as well. So look at that. Not listening.
Yeah.
Not the listening. You know what? I think the reason why not, they're always stressed when they start the listening part, but the attention focuses so much on the listening that they end up being, they have to, like, their attention goes directly on understanding what you're saying and answering correctly. And I think that goes with the reading as well. However, the difference between writing and speaking and these two other, listening and reading, is the fact that you have to improvise.
Yeah.
So improvisation might be key.
Yeah.
And working under stressful situations.
I mean, of course, improvising is a key concept that you have to bear in mind whenever you are especially delivering speaking. And what you can do is also techniques like always thinking about the information that you are given and then adding something else. For instance, that's something that I always do with my students, especially with parts that require improvisation at the moment that you cannot prepare at all. Like I tell them, like, hey, yeah, you're in the supermarket, okay, and then I saw you, so we're gonna improvise. Like, yeah, okay, hi, how are you doing? Yeah, but like then how are you doing? And then you tell me, oh, I saw you the other day at the park. Are you sleeping well? Because I thought that you were not sleeping well because you haven't done sports in such a long time. And then you can take that into more things. And of course, that takes you to the thing that you have been mentioning all this time, which is that you can take it to something that you are aware of or something that you are comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. So if I were just to recap a bit on some strategies, apart from taking it to a personal field, apart from giving your answer from different perspectives, like negating instead of affirming, negating something twice so you actually affirm it. I would also, and resorting to pauses. I think it's not a bad thing to actually make a pause at the beginning. They ask you something and you're like, okay. You can say whether you want to take a couple of seconds to think of it, or you can just actually take the couple of seconds and think of it, and then you start answering. That's not something bad. Okay. Other things that we have been talking about, as for, like now that we are recapping strategies, would be to, where was it? Speaking slower to be clear, okay? And chunking the information in little parts. So that way you're also coherent and you don't just talk about unimportant things. Remember, you can always repeat the question they ask you by reformulating.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you think about that? Okay, so what do I think about this? That's a way of actually making it. You can always, not the best recommendation, but you can always use some things to, especially at the beginning, with some formulas, right? Like using some more linkers than usual.
Yeah.
To say it. Okay, so what do I think about this? Well, firstly, if it were to me, I would honestly... There you go. Like 10 seconds, 5 seconds you just lost by introducing some...
Of course, in this particular case, do this only if you're like really need that extra time. Otherwise, of course, it's going to sound a little awkward that you are just... You're going to start mumbling a little. I believe that my consideration of this topic is a really interesting
Just do it with the weird thing, with the weird topics that you really stuck. Yeah. And admit if there's something you don't know, admit that you're actually not knowledgeable about that, and correct yourself if you make mistakes. That's not a problem. In the end, it's pretty human, unless you're talking to a computer, which are exams like that. However, that might be easier because you don't have a person in front of you. You just have to fight against the timer.
Yeah, there you are. That's it. So that's basically what I believe that is going to be really fruitful for you when you are practicing speaking, again, for an official exam or just in general terms. Nevertheless, I would like to hear what you have to say. Like, I would like to hear what kind of tips you have, or if you do something differently or something along those lines.
Yeah, and what it actually worked for you or for others that you know. So the more tips, the better, so everyone can make use of them.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that with this, we can call it a day, can we?
Definitely.
Okay. Fantastic. So, well, thank you so much. And of course, if you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Rox.